Cooking.
Ladies and gentlemen, we might get started. I think, the PA is actually working. First of all, can I welcome you all here tonight for our inaugural do such as this, where we've actually got a panel of experts here with council to answer your questions. And secondly, I think what will come out of this evening is some good background and for some work that we can do in having a further one early next year. First of all, I'd like to thank all the panellists for giving up their time tonight to actually being here and get comfortable in those seats, and I'd encourage you to run for council next year. The elections are in September, so if you like the seat, think about what you may do next year in running for council. I'd also like to thank our staff, our CEO, David Waddell, who's running around here with chairs at the moment. Very involved CEO. He hasn't done any cleaning yet, but he's very good at moving chairs. And all our other staff that have been involved with this. I'd also like to thank my fellow councillors that are here tonight, Councillor Turner, Councillor Hamling, Councillor Donato I've got, Steve I've got, and Joe I've got. How's that got? Hey, all stand up so they can see, so they can throw things. I've been asked over here. So you probably know who they all are, so you want to ask them any questions afterwards. Without further ado, thank you very much. There are drinks and something to eat outside there, and also there's toilets just outside that door and to your right. And Alan will tell you in the case of an evacuation, yell, scream and run out to the front of the building. So thank you very much. I look forward to hearing what comes out, or hearing the discussion, the debate, and certainly the outcomes of tonight, and look forward to how we can carry it forward into the new year and forward planning for Orange. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Reg. To begin, I'd like to acknowledge the Wiradjuri people, the traditional custodians of the land, and pay respect to elders both past and present of the Wiradjuri nation, and extend that respect to other Aboriginal present people who are present. As Reg's mentioned, the toilets are out the back. The other housekeeping thing, as he mentioned, if there is an emergency, staff will guide you quickly and quietly down the stairs and out into the car park. Please don't come back in until that emergency is over. We say that before every big gathering. I'd like to thank you for coming. It's fantastic to see such a great bunch of people here, and particularly for our expert panel who's come to share their insights across the spectrum of the housing sector in Orange. Now one more housekeeping. We are, for the last 12 months or so, we've been live streaming council meetings. It's gradually growing as a thing to do. We're live streaming tonight. So if you want to check back on something later, there'll be a recording on that page of the YouTube page that's available on the Orange City Council stage, and so you can check anything and see how we go. Today is part of the beginning of a conversation about developing a local housing strategy for Orange. We've had an old one back in 2004. It's a bit worn and tired around the edges, and we're working on a new one. As part of that process, the state government is requiring all councils to do that, and we're working on a new one. And this conversation is part of that process, particularly looking at three aspects of housing. The strategy is much broader, but three aspects of housing that are about homelessness, social, public housing, and affordable housing. Three distinct things that we'll get into shortly, but that's what we're doing here tonight, and our panel brings some expertise across that board. Another little quick disclaimer, I'm here as a journalist. My job with the council is in the communications media field. Please don't take anything I say as having the imprimatur of the planning department. It doesn't. I'm here to explore the topic. I'm here to ask some hard questions, as I've done all my professional life, and give the panel some chance to explain what they're saying. So if I'm asking you a question, don't assume, oh, that's where the council's going, we know now. No. I'm here as the token journalist who's beginning to explore this thing of housing. Those three things that we're here for. Homelessness, social and public housing, and affordable. In recent months, we've had some overlap in the public debate about those sorts of things as we looked at various developments. And there is confusion. It's difficult to get your head around some of those things are. But we're going to work our way through each of those tonight. Homeless, public, community, social and affordable. Looking for what we're doing in Orange now and where we could go in the future. We are very interested in the views of the panels. I'm hoping we'll get through in the next hour and a half. We will finish on time at 7:30. And there will be time, I hope, at the end of the session for some questions from the community. Again, we're recording it and we'll be able to look back on this one as we get stuck into the housing strategy properly and see what are the issues that were raised here. We mightn't have all of the answers. We might begin to articulate some of the good questions. But to start, we'll begin to do that. One of the big things I've got out of tonight as we've started to research it is that what we're doing in Orange now is delivering very well for housing for the middle to upper. When it comes to the middle to lower and the tough end at the bottom, it's even tougher here than it is in other parts of the state. We're a prosperous community and we're doing well, but something about what we're doing here is delivering for the middle and the upper, but for the middle to lower, it's even tougher. So that's what we want to explore tonight, those three bands. As we begin to do that, Dave Walker from Premise has begun some research on behalf of the council. Dave's what used to be called GLIs. He's a consultant that works on a range of things. His background's in town planning. And he's begun to look at the questions of where are we in Orange at present? What is the housing? What are the points of housing stress and where we go from here? Dave, when you start to talk, your little red light will flash in front of you and it should be going. But just if it doesn't just lean forward, it might get you where you are. But as you look around, look for the little red light coming on your mic and you'll know you'll be able to be heard up the back. Dave, from the research you've found so far, what sort of numbers of people in Orange are potentially suffering housing stress?
Thanks, Alan. As Alan says, we've been engaged to look at the housing strategy. It is a 4-step process. We've been engaged to do the first 2 steps, and the really critical part here is looking at the statistics and trying to understand what some of those trends are, so that can assist us and assist the council to develop a strategy moving forward. In terms of the proportion of the community that's in housing stress, it really needs to be broken down into the 2 areas. We've got both people who are renting and people who are purchasing, and those are 2 distinct parts of the community. Where we're dealing with purchases, and this is probably alluding to what Alan was saying, we're not doing too bad. Around 12% of the population who own their own homes are in housing stress, and that means they're spending more than 30% of their gross income per week on housing costs. When we look at renters, it jumps quite substantially to 30%. So those who are renting are seeing 30% of those renting are spending more than 30% of their gross income on housing costs, which is quite a significant number. And the demographic analysis is demonstrating to us that the population is growing, it is ageing, and we are seeing an increase in the number of the demand for the number of small households. So lone person households and couple-only households as a proportion of the housing groups are growing from about 53% of the proportion of the population back in 2011 up to about 57-58% of the population in 2016, and it's expected that those numbers will continue to grow looking forward into the future.
So if things are tight now, how much tighter are they going to be for that group of people?
Well, I think we can expect them to get tighter, but I think there are other factors at play. We're seeing things like Cadia moving forward, which is an excellent thing for the town. It's an excellent thing for the economy, but it brings pressure to housing. We need to accommodate the people coming in to support those construction jobs, and it's not just Cadia. It's the McPhillamy project over at Blaney, Flies Creek Wind Farm, and other, the new private hospital. All those things attract construction workers to town, and all of those things put more pressure. There is also things like Airbnb, people taking their houses out of the rental market, traditional rental market, and putting it into alternative forms of accommodation. So all of those things coming together add pressure to the supply of affordable housing. And then obviously looking at how we supply those, there's environmental constraints around where we put housing and how we supply that housing. Do we supply it through traditional greenfield methods? Do we supply it through alternative methods like group homes, through boarding homes, through medium density housing, through intensification of the development in the CBD? There are a range of things that can be done. So it's about trying to investigate some of those options and look at how that housing demand can be addressed.
In your draft report, which will be publicly available in due course, it's not yet, it's still in the process of being put together, In your draft report, you give, if you like, a 4-stage spectrum of what council can do. We could sit back and do nothing. We could get really adventurous. Could you describe those 4 different options in terms of where we might like to position ourselves as a community?
Certainly. Well, I think sitting back and doing nothing would probably be the 5th option. There are 4 options that we've identified in the study. Those range from sort of limited intervention, where council essentially tries to lead through policy, through directions, essentially letting the market respond. More, I guess, facilitative intervention, looking at taking a more active role in supplying housing. Mandatory intervention, which actually looks at forcing the market to supply that housing, and then direct intervention, which I guess would be council taking us to step into supplying affordable housing through active development. So there are a lot of different steps involved in each of those sort of 4 options, and I guess, as you say, the 5th option is we do nothing, which I think hopefully we can all agree is not a good option. So we haven't included that, but maybe for completeness we should.
Right across the spectrum. Thanks, Dave. You can see that there is a spectrum of views here. How interventionist, how stand back, how much leave it to market, how much involved. All of those, and each of those have many steps. Dave mentioned in one of his points, one of the interesting things about housing in Orange is how from time to time we get these spikes. And we've heard recently of one about Cadia about to bring another construction boom to town. Katie Marshall, there's a few people who aren't on the panel, but who've got a particular insight to add, and we'll be taking those. Katie Marshall's up the back. Katie, would you mind standing up and talking as loudly as you can? Or you can come up to a mic, whatever suits you. What's Orange... Yeah, come up, that'll be easier. Katie's the head of Orange 360. She's also looking at the situation of a particular housing spike that's about to happen when some construction comes up in Orange. Just briefly, what's Orange 360 doing to try and alleviate some of that?
Look, what we're doing, obviously, we're monitoring in terms of just the growth in tourism. That's really our core business. But we're partnering with Newcrest, and I know Jane's in the room here tonight. And so we work really closely. We have weekly meetings with the HR team to be able to look at the numbers of people coming in to be relocated, also the numbers coming in terms of fly in, fly out, and drive in and drive out. Certainly in terms of the numbers that we're seeing, they're not as high as previous expansion phases are. But one of the things is, as a part of the Orange 360 remit, is it's not just about Orange, it's about the villages that surround the entire region in terms of Blaney and Cabonne as well. And so what we're trying to do is actually increase our overall capacity, particularly in terms of tourism. One of our destination brand pillars is around food, wine and farm gate. People who are coming out here to come out for weekends actually want to stay in farm stay style accommodation. So this actually presents us a huge opportunity to actually bring more of that tourism product online, meaning that there's a real focus and an objective, and a key objective as a part of why we're doing this is to make sure that we're not having a downward pressure on your standard style accommodation. And it's about, bringing more visitor economy into the villages. And certainly we already have had great success. We've got a team coming out that our team in Orange 360 have been able to place in Millthorpe, being very mindful that village is still very much reliant on the tourism dollar, so making sure that there's a balance that, for those venues like the Millthorpe Motel, working with the property owner to say, look, make sure that you're at least leaving some of your rooms open for that traditional style visitor. We're already projecting out in terms of seeing, the impact of certainly in terms of our key festivals, but even Bathurst, to be able to say, right, when we've got those key festivals that bring a lot of people to town, we're wanting to be able to work to be able to take them out to what Newcrest has identified as Tier 2. So Cowra and Bathurst, meaning that we can still, as a community and business owners, still benefit from those festivals. So it really is about an active dispersal of the tourism dollar.
Thanks, Katie. As you've seen, one of the pressures happens when one particular sector comes in and puts pressure on the others. It draws existing housing capacity out of the market. And at 360 are taking on that challenge. So the 3 topics: homelessness, social public and affordable. Homelessness to begin. This is some, as you'll see amongst these 3 areas, there are some areas that Orange City Councils almost has nothing to do with. And it's a matter of if we were going to get involved perhaps as an advocacy. Others we can be more hands-on in. Homelessness is one area that it's pretty well in the remit of the state government, and it farms the work out to other agencies. Kim Campbell from Communities and Justice, the old fax, that still looks after housing on behalf of the New South Wales government. What's happening now? How much homelessness is there in Orange, and how does the state government deal with that?
We deal with it in lots of ways. The question of how much homelessness is there, that's always a question of what counts as homelessness. If you want to count it as people who don't have reliable, stable housing that they can trust in every night, the numbers there are quite high. We'd be talking hundreds there in Orange. Those are people who have to rely on friends or family to sleep on their couch. They've got 20, 30 people living in a home that really should only have 4 or 5. Those people for us are considered homeless as well. Right through to Orange has a number of people who sleep rough on the street every night. Right through winter, we went out in September and counted them. 5 a.m. in the morning, it was pretty cold. And just in our short walk around the CBD, we found 5 people sleeping rough here. So that's in the dead of winter. So you can imagine how many more we get when it's lovely summer weather and people are able to come to Orange.
You're planning to do that survey again?
Yeah, we're doing it on February the 18th. At 4 a.m. in the morning, so we'll get a pretty accurate count of how many people have had to just either sleep in their car or sleep somewhere on the street. So that's one type of homelessness we count. We can't count the number of people stuck in overcrowding situations or having to sleep in a tent at the showground. That's another level of homelessness that we consider. The government supports it in many ways. We fund Housing Plus for significant amounts of money to support refuges, temporary accommodation, emergency accommodation, supporting housing, developing more housing, running services to help people with whatever they need at those times. So we do that directly as well as funding other services.
Is it working? If you could wave a magic wand, what would you like to happen? I'm not asking you to comment on government policy here, but are there solutions that would make things better?
I think the things that we've already talked about tonight, just easing that pressure on having a stable home. In Orange, we are really good at building 4-bedroom, 2-bathroom, beautiful homes. That's not for everybody. If you're an elderly person, if you're a young person just left home, that's not something that you want or can access. And the pressure on that adds to the pressure those people experience. So you push that down the line, that's going to add stress to every level. I guess a bit more diversity in Orange. And I guess just a bit more accessibility. We've just talked about the wonderful tourism here. If you've ever tried to find a night in a motel when we've got a mine shut down and all the cleaners have come in, it's incredibly hard in this area to find that one night of accommodation when you just want to get out of the cold. So more accommodation of all sorts would help us.
Thanks, Kim. We'll get back to you. We're going to hear from Housing Plus in a second, but before we do, again, the Salvation Army, Miriam Hardy, is an organisation that deals with coalface, if you like. Miriam, what's your experience of homelessness at Orange? How big is it, and what could be done? What are we doing now, and how could we do things better?
Yeah, so I'm a caseworker with the Salvation Army. I'm linked with the financial assistance that we provide through the Salvation assessment line. And so each week we sort of have a drop-in centre and people come to us for financial assistance, and then you sort of scratch the surface and you find out that there's actually a lot more going on, i.e. homelessness. So below you can see the backpack bed. So if someone is sleeping rough, we offer them this. If they're unable to get temporary accommodation, it's warm, I guess. I personally wouldn't feel comfortable sleeping in it or safe, so yeah.
It's a multifaceted thing that'll help in some cases. It's a band-aid solution, obviously.
Yes, definitely, yeah. So,
how do we compare with our regional neighbours in terms of numbers of homelessness, I wonder? Orange, Bathurst?
Bathurst is probably the same as Orange, I'd say. I couldn't give definite numbers, but just from my experience with the people that I've dealt with in Orange and Bathurst, Bathurst has a men's shelter during homelessness shelter during winter, which is just they've seen huge numbers go through there. So it'd be great to see something like that in Orange if we can. But yeah, so that's it.
Okay. Penny Dordoy from Housing Plus, if you want to go up there. Penny, what's Housing Plus doing, and where do you get your money from?
We are funded by Department of Communities and Justice to provide a homelessness service. We see probably around 1,400 individuals a year. 2/3 of those we're supporting to stay in their homes, so their housing is precarious, their housing is unsafe. their housing is unstable, and we're doing whatever we can to keep them in their homes, because that's kind of the best way and the most effective and affordable and secure way that we can help people, is to keep them in the house that they're in. For the rest of them, probably 400-ish, we're supporting them to find new housing. So as Kim said, we have an 11-bed refuge for men and some women where it's appropriate, but not appropriate for children. We have 4 transitional properties, so for people who need to establish a, say, rental history, or just kind of work more closely with us to learn how to live independently while they... and then there's a few other bits and pieces that we do together where we've got some temporary houses that we use for people who need to stay there for, say, 6 to 12 months and just kind of fix their rental history. We also have the Orchard, of course, that will be coming soon in 6 months, which will be for women and children escaping domestic violence. And we have 3 crisis properties spread throughout Orange for people who are, say, a bit more independent than those that require a refuge and need to stay in Orange.
Penny, between the lines of what you were saying there is also obviously lots of reasons, 800 in one category, another 400 in another. Among that mix of domestic violence, mental illness, family abuse, other reasons people need to get out, is there...
Housing stress, financial stress, budgeting of all sorts. It's not just domestic violence, but relationship breakdown. And where there's domestic violence, it's not just the victim and children, there's perpetrators and other family members and a whole range of people that can be made homeless as a result of the family breakdown, mental illness, drug and alcohol.
If you could wave your magic wand, what would you like to see the community of Orange do better in terms of homelessness?
I think similar again to what Kim was saying, I think just we need more options. I think we're great at servicing one end of the town, and I think we just need a range of options. Not every response is going to be suitable for everyone. And I think those backpacks, while I think they're great as well for those people who we can't, particularly in a mine shutdown, when we cannot find anywhere for anyone to stay, for people to stay, if we can go and leave them a backpack where they are and at least know they'll be warmer, that is a good option. But it's not ideal. It's not how we want to look after people. We want everybody to have housing, and I think for us, a good way of doing that is emergency housing and moving people through the continuum into long-term housing. People need to build up the skills and to be able to sustain that long-term housing. It's not just about having an empty house and having a person who's homeless and putting them together. There's a lot of work that happens.
Thanks, Penny. That's homelessness, a really short pen sketch. You can see how complex it is and how much you can spend time on each of those. Social public housing. Again, this is aimed at people and providing housing for people who are very low income, unemployed, other categories of people whose income is very low as opposed to low to moderate. Kim Campbell, again, it's the New South Wales government that picks up that part of the puzzle. What sort of numbers of people need, in that very low income, either need housing or on waiting lists in Orange at present?
On the wait list in Orange, we have hundreds, is what we're talking about for Orange. Those people are waiting on average 3 to 5 years for a 3-bedroom home. If you want a 2-bedroom home, as Dave said this morning, it's about a 10-year wait.
Just bump that up a second. Yep.
Sure. So hundreds of people asking for that. In terms of priority, so they're currently homeless and that they do not have stable housing. Again, we're talking 100 or so people. Some of those people have medical conditions that mean that they need particular housing. They're not able to find that in the private market, so the government comes in to assist with modified properties. So we've got the full range. I think if anybody's tried to survive on a pension or a disability pension at the moment, like Orange, where rents are high, that's very difficult. It's comparable to trying to find rental in Sydney.
A much larger group than the homeless?
Yeah, in Orange we have about 900 tenancies on any given day, and so that's everybody from single young men who have just left home through to older couples in their 80s who have just trying to survive on what they're...
It used to be the case that there was a housing department and lots of public housing. Is there as much of that, or is the government farming it out to private agencies?
The government's doing both. We certainly haven't reduced the numbers recently in Orange. We cycle through, obviously, with maintaining numbers and also providing funding for organisations like Housing Plus to increase that. For us, it's about diversity, having lots of people involved in that to make sure that the sector is as robust as it can be.
Justin Cantello from Housing Plus. What's Housing Plus doing in terms of public and social housing? How many tenants do you have? How many houses are you doing on behalf of the government, on behalf of the community?
Yeah, so here in Orange, we manage or own around 300 social houses. And currently, as Kim mentioned, we're delivering 220 new social and affordable homes across Central West and Arana. That's about 60 here in Orange specifically.
How do you describe your service as opposed to the way the government housing is it different qualitatively in the way you try and manage things?
Yeah, so in terms of how we deliver social and affordable housing, it is different to how it's been done in the past, where you might have high concentrations, like the old Housing Commission in a large area. So the new way of delivering social and affordable housing is integrating it within established neighbourhoods. And the international and national research supports that it doesn't instill antisocial behaviour problems or crime. And that's certainly been our experience here as well, because we've been developing new social and affordable houses. We don't experience the problems of the past. So we feel that it is the way forward, is delivering small developments of up to 20 dwellings in an established area is a really good outcome for the tenants as well as the community at large.
You've described them as social and affordable. Are there two different categories of people moving in, or is it just the way you're describing it?
Yeah, so I think a simple way of explaining it, which is not exact every time, but broadly speaking, the moderate income earner is related to the affordable, and then the low to very low is for the social.
Is it the same housing stock that they're moving into?
Yeah, the way that we develop new dwellings, it's the same standard, same type, and it's majority of it is 80 to 90% of new developments is 1 and 2 bedrooms, because that meets the demand. As David was saying earlier, the lone person is trending upwards, particularly here in Orange. It's actually trending more so here in Orange compared to Sydney.
Eliza Gibbs from Barnardo's, thanks for coming. How is tell me about your organisation and how it's involved in providing social public housing.
So Barnardo's has many offices across all of Western. In some of our areas we have specialist housing services, particularly for women who are leaving incarceration and helping them transition into the market as well as some domestic violence properties for women and children escaping domestic violence. And we also work with families who are having their children restored to them as well, and I guess supporting them in maintaining a housing property.
The way you're describing it sounds a whole lot more complex than simply giving them the keys to the door. There's lots more personal support that happens.
And I totally agree with that. While bricks and mortar are extremely important, there's also other questions about why are these people not maintaining their properties? How can we help them, maintain them, pay that rent, not get kicked out because of property damage, and acknowledging what the barriers are in regards to that as well. So acknowledging that there may be children who have disabilities that may be causing property damage and ensuring that they can maintain those properties still. Looking at, why aren't they able to get the property in the first place? Was there a partner who previously caused damage to their property that gave them a bad housing record, or controlled their money that prevented them from being able to pay their rent, and now they can't get a house either? And can they not get a larger house because it is just them now, and that's preventing them from getting their kids returned in their care? So it's more than a bricks and mortar issue. It's actually finding out what we need to do to support these people to maintain housing in general.
Thank you very much. Okay, again, a quick thumb sketch of social public housing. We've heard about homelessness and social public, and now have a crack at affordable. Back to Dave Walker. Let's flesh out that number. A number you made reference to a couple of times. 30% of housing. If I'm paying more than 30%, that's going to make it difficult for me. Could you just refresh us? How many people are in that category, and it is growing?
Yeah, so we're talking about housing stress, which is spending more than 30% of your income on housing costs. As I said at the start, for purchases in Orange, that's about 12% of people are in housing stress, and for renters, about 30%. And it has flow-on impacts because if you're spending a lot of your money on housing costs, then you can't afford necessarily to pay for your groceries, pay for your bills, pay for your kids' school fees, uniforms and the like. So squeezing in one part of your budget, and we all understand it, squeezing one part of your budget squeezes other parts of you as well. So it doesn't just have impacts from a housing perspective, it has flow-on impacts to all areas of the local economy and also to people's quality of life and how they live their lives. So it's certainly a large issue, and the housing strategy is one small part of it, I think.
And implicit in that is that there is an income to have a part of. We're not talking, unemployed or completely
Certainly,
no income. These are people who are working, perhaps. And as I've got my head around some of this, it's interesting that a low to moderate income category can include people who are working in childcare, entry-level positions in aged care, council, a range of organisations who, at that entry level, are still in that low to moderate. It's easy to say we've all been through that, these kids these days, they should just toughen up. Well, in a place like Orange, what sort of a community do we want to be? Justin Cantello, someone comes to you and says they're in housing stress and they're working, there's stereotypes that come up when that happens. Tell me about the real people. Who are they?
Yeah, that's right. So they're typically early career teachers or nurses, cleaners, childcare workers, often referred to as key workers. And we see them every day where they are experiencing housing stress, and when we can provide an affordable rent, which is basically where we charge 80% of the median market rent. So that's what makes it affordable, and as David was saying, gives them more money to pay for other essential items, and it makes a big difference. It can also help a young couple, for example, they want to save for a deposit. So that 20% that they're saving, they can contribute towards a deposit. But I think it's really important to note that the moderate incomes, which I've got here, is it's quite surprising when you learn about it. So for a single person, a moderate income is $58,000, and for a couple it's $88,000, and for a couple with two kids it's $123,000. So people who are earning those amounts would be eligible for our affordable housing or affordable housing.
Because of the high rent and price of buying accommodation in Orange, that still puts them over that 30% mark.
Yeah, so they need to be another element of it to be eligible is they need to be within that in that income bracket, and we make sure that they're not experiencing rental stress, so that they're not paying more than 30% of their income, and that's what puts them in that eligibility space.
Thanks, Justin. Across the board there, you can see that that's something of the scale of the problem. What can we do about it? How can we go differently? Currently, the system as we've got it across the board of various ways of delivering housing is delivered for that top end, but there's a gap there that isn't being met. Dave Fenton, a developer, is with us tonight. Thanks for coming, Dave. Why do you think, is it the job of the market to deliver affordable housing? Why isn't it?
I think affordable housing really reflects, in Orange, our costs have been going up all the time. So I think we've pushed out of affordable housing limits at the moment. I've been doing subdivisions for 18, 20 years, and we've always, probably 80% of our subdivisions have been catering for that mid-range market. We've finished up Waratahs, we did a few subdivisions up there, but now moved to Shirley, as council has directed us to. Shirley Development Control Plan, that's where they want us to develop, so we've moved down there. But we were selling blocks, even 3 years ago, for $135,000. Britain Gums Estate, things like that. Our starting price down here on a 700 square metre block, $195,000. People's expectation of what their land is worth has gone up. We used to buy land at $15,000, $17,000 a lot. We're now paying $35,000. If you go up to West Orange, we could be paying $45,000, $50,000 for it. So over that time since I've been developing, we've been contributions started at $5,000. The contributions now with fees are $35,000.
Council contributions.
Council contributions. The standard of required under Shirley now, the engineering standards, footpath both sides, street trees, paved entrance to intersections. Our engineering costs have gone from 2022 up to 40, probably go to 45, just the civil engineering costs. So it's costing us $154,000 to build a 700 square metre block. That's $32,000, $35,000 average price for 700 square metre divided for the landholder. $40,000 to do roads, stormwater, curb and gutter, sewer. Our power costs, we never used to pay for power. We used to dig the trench, Central Energy would come in. We pay for design, low voltage, high voltage, street lighting, substations. Substation only does 40 houses. So 120,000 every 40 houses just for substations. So we get no benefit. They just pay for the headworks, bringing it to Orange. NBN we never paid for. We used to dig a trench. Telstra used to lay the. It's now $2,500.
All of the things you're describing there are what we like to have in our house.
Yeah, and that's just a standard.
We've got to pay for it, and the impact of that pushes someone else out of the market. That's a consequence. But you've got to make a profit, and you've got to buy land off someone for whom that's their superannuation.
So that's right. Most of the people we're buying are people who've had a 5-acre block. This is my big chance to get out and retire. So they sell us land and the house. So we've got to somehow get the house off and sell the house as well. So. Yeah, $154,000. Professional fees are $4,000. Legal fees $1,000. GST, the government hits you straight away. We don't even see the GST anymore. It's taken out on settlement. On the margin scheme, $15,000 straight away to the government. Agents commission $7,000. Legals $1,500. Then you get down to our borrowing costs. We pay nearly 6%. I think my average home loan is paying 3.8 or 3.9. So we holding cost for a year is $4,000. The total cost of all that's $154,000. We then sell the block at $195,000, so we've made $40,000. And the tax office says no, every 3 months you pay us PAYG at 27.5 cents in the dollar too. So we're making $29,000 a block, and that's less than what we're paying the people who we're buying the land off. But we've got to be at that mark, about 20% of the sale price, total sale price. We've got to be at that mark, otherwise we don't get funding from the bank. If we go below that, we call it our profit, gross profit. They call it our risk factor. That is the factor that if we go up, tail up, bottom up, they'll say fire sale, they'll sell our development. They know they've got 20% margin to get rid of everything. First they sell your house, then they sell the land. That's the easiest thing to sell. So that's we call it profit, they call it risk factor. It's about 20%, and you won't get funding very rarely unless you've got a sure thing. If you are not achieving over 20% gross. And when you say if you do a 30-lot subdivision, it's cost you $1 million for your land, $3 million to develop it. The old days it used to be 1/3 for the landholder, 1/3 to build it, 1/3 profit, tax comes out running your company. Now it's 20% landholder, 60% to develop, 20% for us. So you bypass the land for $1 million, cost you $3 million to develop it. They don't take any value of the land, the banks. So you've got $4 million out for a 30-lot subdivision. You can't get construction funding until you've got 120% of your total loans exchange contracts. So on a 30-lot subdivision, we say $4.8 million, 120% of the total loan. Of a 30-lot subdivision, we've got to have 24, 25 blocks exchange prior to them releasing the funding for construction. So that's changed so much in the last 4 years. APRA, the banking inquiries, developers are at the bottom of the food chain. We are the last ones to get money. They don't want to lend money to developers. They want to lend it to mortgages and credit cards. So at the bottom of the food chain, there's only probably 2 or 3 developers left in Orange now. That's it. So, and we're only getting it because of our experience, and we get our pre-sales. Unfortunately, the pre-sales, builders are coming in trying to secure their work for the next 3 years. So they're the ones who race in and buy 3 lots.
Let's hear from a builder.
They've got to buy the lots to secure their work for the next 12 months.
Mick Banks from Banksia Building. Is it the same? Is it as tough a build as it is for developers?
Well, it's a very similar story, really. The cost of housing's gone up, cost of building's gone up the last couple of years, even just for things that you don't get any more house for. So home warranty insurance, which is a compulsory insurance that we've got to pay for. It's doubled or double and a half. So I mean, on a $350,000 house, you could spend nearly $4,000 just on the home warranty insurance policy. That's basically if the builder dies, goes bankrupt, goes missing. So I mean that you don't get any house for that. Safety. A lot of things that we probably should have been doing for years, but things like road opening permits and contamination reports, things like that. That's all added to costs of houses. There's a couple of grand in that, and just the material costs. I mean, they've gone up. So a lot of people, I'm hearing what people are saying that 1 or 2 bedroom houses is what people want, but a 1 bedroom house has probably got a $1,200 hot water system in it. 4 bedroom house has got the same hot water system in it, so a $1,200 hot water system. So you divide that $1,200 by say 1 bedroom, or 15 squares, or divide that hot water system by 24, 25 squares, or 4 bedrooms. So the cost of a 1 bedroom house, that's probably the simplest example I can think of. But you've got kitchens and toilets or roller doors, all those sort of things that a 1 bedroom house is a very, very expensive house to build. I'm only going off the cuff here, just thinking of a few numbers, but say a 1 bedroom house might cost $180,000. You throw that on a $190,000 block of land, you're looking at $370,000. Now, there are ways of making that cheaper by putting 2 houses on the 1 block, but that $370,000 could go down to you buy that $190,000 block of land, subdivide it in 2. It costs you about $40,000 worth of subdivided block of land. So by the time you got your council contributions and you run your extra stormwater line, sewer line, and power in, that's $220,000. Divide that by 2 is $110,000. You're still putting a $180,000 house on it. That $370,000 then comes back to $290,000 sort of thing. You know what I mean? So I mean that. A lot of people complained up in North Orange there a few years ago up in Waratahs about how every corner had a dual lock on it, which I don't really think in North Orange the dual locks were offensive. They had a block of land, corner block of land like this, they subdivided like that. They had a house on one side, one frontage, and the house on from another frontage. So really, if you drive up North Orange, that I suppose Ruby Street, all that that sort of area there, you wouldn't know now that they were dual locks or they were subdivided blocks of land, because they don't look like a unit complex. You know what I mean? So, but a lot of the builders, I suppose, builders and developers did that to reduce the cost of the building or reduce the cost of the land, and I suppose to make a bucky out of it. I mean, you look at a 4 bedroom house these days, you're paying $190 for that block of land. A very, very basic 4 bedroom house is about $320,000. So you're looking at $510 just to get into the market. Those first home buyers or newlyweds or whatever, you got to spend $510. That's not including holding costs. So I mean, you might have $10,000 worth of holding costs throughout the build, or all your mortgage insurance and all that sort of thing.
Thanks, Mick. We're coming back to you in a second with some as we flesh out some possible solutions. But you can see that the cost of building a house. We like a high quality house in a high quality suburb with NBN. We pay for that, and part of paying high means that someone's going to miss out further down because that's not affordable for the putters that are there. How do we meet that need as a community? How do we work out a way to get everyone a house? If that's a market failure, let's pretend it is, or if it's the way the market works, that's all very logical and clear. Dave, in your report, you floated the idea of a thing called SEP 70. Could you explain roughly what... let me have a crack and then you tell me where I've got it wrong. One of the reasons Orange City Council is, like, the planner's nervous already. He's looking at me saying, oh, what's he going to say? There's a state planning standard, and once Orange City Council adopts this local housing strategy, if we include things like particular aims of achieving social affordable homelessness, we'll be able to take advantage of some provisions in state legislation that will let us decide how much to charge to a developer if they meet particular needs. Dave, have I got it right?
It's an excellent attempt. It's not a simple issue. I'm not going to pretend it is. trying to simplify it as much as I possibly could. It's been something that's been available in the metropolitan regions for some time. It's recently been extended to apply to the whole of the state. The idea is that it gives the council the opportunity through a local contribution scheme to impose conditions on development consents for development and require the payment of contributions towards the delivery of affordable housing. So it's one question, or it's one thing to say we are going to seek money from developers to do that. It's another thing to then say, how as a council do we spend that money? So,
For example, if Orange City, and there are many ways it could be implemented, but if, say, Orange City Council said to a developer, could one of the ways forward be if you allocate, you're putting up 100 units and you make 5 of them affordable, we'll charge you less money? Or 5 of your blocks in your 100-block subdivision, if the contribution is less, does that close the gap? Is that roughly what we're talking?
Well, that could be one option. One option would be to impose some sort of requirement that some proportion of the either the lots in the subdivision, as it were to be supplied for the purposes of affordable housing. Because we don't in Australia traditionally see developers coming in building swathes of new homes like you would see in some of the European countries, it's not so easy to impose a condition that says you must supply 10% affordable housing, or in my experiences working in London, it was 50% affordable housing as a developer. If you were building a 10-storey building with 50 flats in it, half of those must meet the definition of affordable. And that's a fairly extreme response to a problem, but in a place like London, it's a fairly extreme problem. We're at the very bottom end of the problem here in Orange, but certainly you could impose a requirement that says to a developer, you must make 10% of your blocks available at a cheaper price that enable the supply of affordable housing, or the alternative would be to take a proportion of financial contribution from them for each lot created, and then the council needs to decide how they spend that money, whether it's through, as we talked earlier about direct intervention, whether it's through supporting someone like Housing Plus or some other social housing provider to provide housing, or whether it's I'm sure there's many other ways that it can be done. So there's a whole fairly complicated conversation that needs to be had around that area.
But big picture, some assistance. Dave Fenton, if Orange Council let you off some of your contributions, could you...
Let you off, they would charge, or charging contributions or increasing contributions?
Well, there's a couple of different options there. One might be to say, if you supply 10% affordable housing, we'll waive some of your other contributions, rather than saying you must pay more. Or the other option is, there would be an additional financial contribution that you pay $5,000 per lot that you create, and for that $5,000 that comes into the council, they put that towards an affordable housing fund. So it depends which way the market preferred to be taken. It depends which way the council wants to take the market. So there are a number of options. It's not limited to those two, but those are two fairly straightforward examples that could be used.
Obviously, that goes on to the margin. If the margin's at the minimum now, that puts you risk your funding from the bank. So if you say, okay, we'll put our contributions from $35,000 to $40,000 a lot, and that's over the whole, say, 25 lots out of 30, you probably make your development uneconomic in terms of the bank size. We're not talking about the bank size funding wise. Where they've used a lot of that contribution stuff in Sydney has been in multi-storey buildings, high-rise and things like that. I don't think a lot of the guys are racing around trying to buy 700 square metres blocks and putting 4-bedroom homes at 550, 600,000. You're looking more at 200s and 400s and building 2-bedroom homes, which the Shirley plan allows for.
Yep.
You've got 200s and 400s. Half of Shirley would be, or more than half, would be 400s and 200 square metre blocks, designated. But you go to a landholder and say, okay, you've got 35 lots, and I say, but half of them 200, half of them are 400. We can only pay you 15 to 20 for that 200, and we'll pay you 25 for the 400s. Oh no, we want 35, 40. Well, the whole thing blows out. We've got 5 200 to 400 square metre blocks. That's designated on the DCP, on the LEP. We've got 23 400 square metre blocks and 61 700 square metres. We've had no takers on for 12 months on the 500s, the 200s to 400s. They're at 150,000. And the 400 square metre blocks, 23 of them, we sold 9 in 12 months. Now, everyone said, 200 square metre blocks should be selling instead of 109, we should be selling for 85. We can't, because the contributions are the same for 200 as a 3,000 square metre block. council still wants $35,000. NBN still wants a $2,500 charge.
If the council didn't want its 35,000, and because they thought
so
of some
they can
social
decide
good,
on it.
instead of I'm not committing this to the council, I'm just raising it for discussion.
That's right.
If the council said instead of you giving us 35 per block, we'll only take 20,
Well,
15,
Waratah's
would that make your?
developed-
Could you still do affordable for a profit?
Waratah's developed.
I think that was a
plan
yes.
had- yes.
Yes.
Waratah's developed trial plan had a varying contribution from 2-bedroom, 3-bedroom, 4-bedroom.
Sure.
We got a flat contribution down there for 200 square metre to 3,000 square metre block. NBN don't change. Essential energy, all we're saving is the frontage of a road, but half the width of a normal block. So we're saving curb, asphalt, length of copper wire. We've still got to provide pillar boxes, NBN connections, and so we from 195 back to 150. Basically, it's the saving on the civil side.
One of the variations on the theme here is sometimes it's on a greenfield site like Shirley, other times it's infill development where there's a surrounded block, so established housing already there when the stuff is already in the ground.
Yep.
From a builder point of view or developer, whoever wants to buy into this one, again, to put new houses at a less council contribution, buy a double block and put 10 units on it. Is with a lower contribution, does that make affordable housing more profitable for a builder?
Of course, I mean, I've got some figures here. So so the existing house is a real life thing. Existing house, big block of land with a put a duplex on it. There's 26 about $46,000 worth of council contributions to put this duplex. So 2 3-bedroom houses in the backyard of this this property. Yeah, they're going to be getting the rates for the rest of their life, for these extra 2 houses. So I mean that $46,000. I mean if you could reduce that in some sort of way, well then sell instead of selling them for $370, you might be able to sell them for $350. You know what I mean? Else, but
Sure.
I mean,
or there might be just an agreement to sell them to a housing agency who will then develop them as affordable housing, and continue to maintain them.
I suppose,
Where
yeah.
that's happened in other places, Justin, if you looked at buying blocks do the numbers add up for you to buy a block and build a house on it as part of a subdivision?
Yeah, so to give some context, if we were paying $150,000 for a lot, it's just simply not affordable. The way that our funding and development structure works is we put together a development feasibility based on 80% of median market rent. So it's not 80% of new to better, it's median market rent. So the income that we receive is lower. So when we're building, say, a 2-bedroom unit, it's more in that sort of somewhere between $300,000 and $350,000 that we can build it. So we're more looking at paying for a developed site more around the $100,000 mark for it to work, for it to all stack up, because we borrow the money. We have to pay that loan over 20 plus years, and $150,000 is just is too expensive.
So you're going away from really developed lots. You need an englobo site where then you can go and do your development like a unit site. Even if we got council assistance and dropped contributions off a 200 square metre block, and NBN tax office, none of those would change. They won't budge. But you need to get back to 100. So that's well below our ability to provide it. So you need to get a greenfield site and actually do your own development yourself, or have a developer do it. There was a model in Sydney where they were trying it, a couple of older developments years ago, was saying to the state government, I'll build you 30 lots, subdivision at this, as long as you can guarantee me 10 or 15% profit, because that's what I'll need to borrow the money. And they had that model going, and so they went in and built 30 lot housing estates for affordable housing. But yeah, as a developer, you wouldn't get your funding providing blocks at $100,000. Yeah, you wouldn't.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, the 2 approaches that work for us is through multi-dwelling housing approach, through an R1 zoned area, and we can make that work, as well as only in particular cases a dual occupancy site, because if you're paying just around 200 or around that price and you're splitting into 2, it can work sometimes, but it's very difficult in this current market to pay $200,000 for a dual lock site.
One of the other changes that's being floated as possible solutions is inner city housing. It's hard to, Orange is only a small place, but there are sections of Orange that are closer to the centre than others. What if some again, not greenfields, are different from infill in an established residential area? What if there were some blocks closer into the city that might have been used for different purposes? Greg King's like to come to the microphone. Greg's would be known by some of you as, if I mention the word boarding house, a couple of projects that have come up that he's working on, another one that got knocked back. Greg, tell me about the two that you've got in Orange and how that fits into affordable housing.
Well, they are. That's the step they're under. They're under the new generation boarding houses, which they fit under the state government regulation of affordable housing. And it sits under the SEP from that point of view. That was disappointing about the March Street development because there was 24 rooms there, or suites, that would have been another 24 rooms in the marketplace. But it's the perception from the community of what these are delivering to the marketplace. I concur.
What's a boarding house, Greg?
Well, a boarding house is what we call shared living. Okay, but in our case, we've actually taken it to new levels where they're actually fully self-contained. So these were going to be completely fully self-contained, where they weren't sharing kitchens, they weren't sharing bathrooms, they weren't sharing other things. They were completely self-contained. So, and it's a bit like what David and Michael's been saying, and I concur with everything they're saying, because there's no different in this space in reference to funding, to council contributions, to everything else that goes into it, the services. I've just been hit with a $90,000 bill from Essential Energy on our project at Molong Road that wasn't in our equation, because they're saying, oh, you're going to put too much load on our system. Right now, these are the things that others just don't see, but these gentlemen do, and we do all the time. And it just keeps adding. I was just sitting there listening to the guys talk, and I'm thinking, I just did some numbers. On our Molong Road site, it's $182,000 a 30 square room, including land, which includes council contributions and every other charges from infrastructure, state government stuff and other things like that.
That's how much it's costing you?
That's what it's going to cost me to deliver that 14 rooms on that site, right, including the land. Now, we've got another site in McLaughlin Street, that's 22 rooms. It's going to be similar, if not more. You start doing the numbers, and that's where it comes down to the affordability. And like, I've met with David at Housing Plus as well about 18 months ago, and he said, how do we do this? Well, I've also got an association, and I'm actually work very closely with the founder and CEO of the Future Housing Task Force. And I was at a seminar up in Brisbane, not this weekend, the weekend before, presenting at that as well, about what we're doing in this space. Each state's are different from that perspective. Now, we're talking about smaller solutions, and I've had a discussion with David and Mark today just around these things, and yourself, to the point of view, we need to deliver affordable living housing solutions. That's the space I'm in. And I totally respect where David and Mark are coming from, in the sense that to build smaller is more expensive. But that's what's needed. But as I was saying to you, Alan, is that the community has changed. We've got different aspects of it. We've got services staff that come here on short assignments, in the sense of employment assignments, supporting the community. You've got Newcrest doing what they're doing. They've got people coming in. It's this balance. We've got some ideas on what we've been working with state and federal governments around in coming up with these solutions. And I'm going to use one word, and I've said it in this chamber before: smaller, smarter homes. Michael, you remember me talking about this about 2 years ago, right? These are the solutions we need to have to start adapting, and being allowed to get more of these on one lot, as these two gentlemen are talking about. It's the only way you can get the cost down. And unfortunately, the next problem we're going to have, and Michael and David know this as well, with what the industry's going through from putting these into market, it's the cost of materials, but also the cost of what's been going on in the industry and what's going to happen going forth, and the cost of building. Our trades are going to have to become certified. So they're going to be have to have insurances. What do you think that's going to do to the cost of building as well? And that was only been spoken about in the last 2 weeks at a high level, that it's coming. So costs are only going to go higher.
In the wake of some fairly spectacular housing unit disasters in Sydney,
unfortunately,
there's been
yes,
calls for
exactly.
the state government to take action.
Absolutely.
Guess
exactly.
who'll pay?
Yep, that's
Sure.
right.
And what will that do for the lower end of the market?
Absolutely. And that was what was disappointing when we weren't able to get March Street across the line, because it was the same thing. It was collating collective communities. And I, for one, are not into creating ghettos. It's about integration. It's about making things affordable for everyone, whether it be from renting or from a purchase point of view. I put it out there to the community, for the ones that have got elders. I've got elderly parents that are in their 80s. I've got my father now living with me because he couldn't continue to live on his own after my mother passed away 5 years ago, or 5.5 years ago. So there's a lot of people like us that are taking our elderly parents into the equation, but there's all that other aspect yet that's not even being considered. And these are the impacts that are coming. And I really am passionate about this. That's why I was passionate about March Street and the way what we had to deal with it, moved on from it. But coming back to that, I had to sell that site. I couldn't get it to stack at all, even with doing 7 townhouses on it. I had to unsell it because of all the costs associated. And when you come to funding it, I couldn't get it funded. So what do you do?
Thanks, Greg.
Thank you.
Appreciate your points too. Again, we're coming up with some, not so many solutions, but we're going away with a better understanding of some of the problems. One of the issues that's come up as Housing Plus has dealt with some of its projects in recent times, there's been some controversial ones. Do I want people like that to live next door to me? We talked earlier on about who these people like that are. Jason, is that one of the struggles that you're finding in terms of, is the perception of who's going to live there one of the challenges that you face when you're trying to put a new development into Orange?
Yeah, I think recent history has shown that it is challenging for us to get certain consents for our affordable housing developments. And I think that's partly because there is a lot of misperception out there.
We've heard tonight that your clients in this affordable sector are entry-level people who are nurses and childcare workers and aged care workers.
That's correct. And I think to add context to that, there's age pensioners, people on disability pension. There's also a lot of people that have worked for their whole life and then something bad has happened, such as a breakdown in relationship, particularly we're finding in over 55 women, and they find themselves homeless as they're getting over 55. So there's a real broad range of people who do need social and affordable housing, and our experience in delivering social and affordable housing is that we just, as long as it's managed properly and we keep on top of it and that it's delivered in an integrated way within the community, we just don't have problems any more than another real estate agent would have with rental accommodation.
If you've left your email address as you checked in, I was watching a video that the Community Housing Industry Association's got on their website this afternoon. They went to the Shoalhaven, where council was involved in establishing some affordable housing units. They went back, and controversy at the time, Landed Environment Court. They went back, and the association and the consultant went back 5 years later, interviewed the locals. Oh no, is that social housing there? Oh, no. Yeah. Everyone's fitting in, there's no drama, no one's lost housing values, but clearly the perception is still there. Kim Campbell, because of that perception and for all sorts of other reasons, the idea of salt and pepper developments around a city rather than all in the one place. Could you say what that means and how it's different from how we used to do Glenroy?
So we used to talk about housing estates, and as Justin mentioned, that's not helpful for either the people living in those estates or the community around them. It's not helpful for anybody really. So we've moved away from that for quite some time. I think at least 15 years the department's had policies in place and processes to move that away. I mentioned before that Orange, we have about 900 tenancies. In Glenroy and Bowen, I've got about 300, maybe 350 of those tenancies. So you do the math, there's 600 other tenancies, and if I look at a map of Orange, there's pretty much a social housing house on almost every street in Orange, and you wouldn't be aware of that. We're talking about a large proportion of our tenants are just like you. So they could be you, they might be you at some stage. They're upstanding members of our society who have just had a really hard time for a moment and they need a bit of extra support. public housing these days is not a lifetime guarantee. There's a lot of support that goes into moving these people back into the private rental market, an unstable period in their life. The other option is that if you actually have the government as your tenancy manager, in the last 12 months the government's reformed a lot how we manage antisocial behaviour. We've introduced a 3-strike policy and then you're out. And that's having a huge effect on our antisocial behaviour rates. We've seen in just the last 12 months that we've had it in place across the state. If you get issued a first strike, we've reduced antisocial behaviour by 80% after that. So it's having a real impact. I answer a lot of letters. I know that it's frustrating if you have a neighbour that isn't acting in a way that respects the Residential Tenancies Act, but at least you can write me a letter if I'm the tenancy manager. If I up and sell that property, you don't have anybody to write to. So I think there's a real misnomer around how the government supports those tenants and who those tenants are, and I think we just don't even notice most of our tenants.
Thanks, Kim. We tried to make tonight a councillor-free zone, and I want to make one exception. It's been good for the councillors here that they can listen. Councillor Russell Turner, in a discussion with him the other day, had an interesting idea, if you want to put your 2 bobs worth in, Russell. The idea of, as the public housing has moved away from Glenroy and the salt and pepper of scattering around, is there an opportunity? It sounds counterintuitive when you first hear about it, but see what Russell makes of it. Russell, is there an opportunity to revitalise Glenroy by putting some affordable housing back, or will that reinvent the problems?
Alan, firstly, who'd want to be a developer? Thank you, David, for hanging in there. and to Mick, and thank you everyone that's here tonight for coming along and airing some of your views and listening in. My concern started to arise when we had, as a council, had discussions with Housing Plus, with the Forbes Road development and Lantana Place, etc. And I said, well, there's got to be some alternative to what we are doing now, and also to the guidelines that Housing Plus have set by the state government to some extent. If I get a few things wrong, I apologise, but the other thing that concerns me is in the Glenroy-Bowen area, which are principally, as people my age, the old Housing Commission areas. A lot of my friends were born and raised in those areas, and they said at the time that they were a great place to live. They proudly sent their kids to Glenroy School, etc., etc. Those same grandparents are now saying, I wouldn't like to send my grandkids to Glenroy anymore. What has changed? Are we going to leave it as it is? We heard, from Housing Plus and that, where they are not encouraging going into these housing estates. They're looking at more integrated housing. We have the situation, I would estimate, somewhere between 50 and 80 vacant blocks of land in Glenroy and Bowen, where homes have been burnt down over the years, and the department's policy not to replace those houses. So what do we do with all those vacant blocks when we're talking about the cost of developing new blocks? Surely council could work in with the state government in some way, in a positive way, that we can put some new life and some pride back into those areas. There are lots of people over there that have bought their own homes. They've bought the Housing Commission home and they've paid them off somehow or other. They're proud of where they live, but they're also fearful of some of the antisocial behaviour, and it was great to hear how that has improved. But surely council can work in with the state government somehow or other to get some action on all those vacant blocks. It's not only those vacant blocks. You look at some of those old Housing Commission houses where they'll build out of weatherboard or fibro. They've had virtually nothing done inside as far as the kitchens, the bathrooms, etc. They are reaching the end of their viable life. They have to be replaced as well. And most of them, it would be cheaper to build a new home rather than try to renovate those existing homes. Those people deserve more than what we're giving them at the moment. Surely some of those vacant blocks, and Mick Banks has mentioned, some of the cost of building a smaller home is just as much as a big home. But surely, if we can work in with the state government, somehow or other, get a vacant block, the government virtually gives us the block for nothing or whatever, put 2 affordable homes on that one block, because some of them are quite big blocks, work in with the state government and with the council. I think our council, as a pilot program for other regional cities right throughout New South Wales, we could be a leader in this if we get the approval and the support of state government, work together, put new homes on these vacant blocks. And it's my idea. I would like to think that that is part of the answer to our affordable home crisis. I acknowledge what everyone else has said. Everyone agrees we need more affordable housing. I think this is a positive way of looking in with the state government in solving some of that crisis that we're going through.
Thanks, Russell. We've got about 15, 20 minutes left, so I want to take some questions from the floor if we can. Before I do that, just think if you've got one. If you haven't, I'm going to ask you to put your hand up in a minute. Any particular people on the panel who've want to jump in with a burning issue to something they've heard through the night that they haven't had a chance to respond to? If they'd like to, now's your chance. Yep. Justin and then Dave. Yep.
Just in response to Russell.
Not necessarily with Russell, anything you've heard tonight, but sure.
Just
Russell,
to add
if
to
you
that,
like.
yeah.
Sure.
So there actually is a state government renewal fund called Communities Plus, where it looks at working with state government and a community housing provider and a council. You work together to renew an estate area. So there's already a program out there that the Orange Council, or as a group, we could put an unsolicited proposal to the state government, because at the moment the Communities Plus program has been successful in Sydney, but they haven't come up with a very good regional solution. So I think if we can get together with Kim and DCJ and the council and Housing Plus and start coming together on how we can renew that area, for example, as a 10-year master plan. And over time, you can sell private dwellings going from the outside in with a mix of affordable and social, and create an integrated neighbourhood and really renew that area.
Dave?
I was just wanted to ask, Housing Plus, you sell housing, are you subject to GST?
We're not, so that's an advantage that we have.
So I'm just saying, out of our costs there, council contributions 35,000, GST 15,000, tax 14,000. Are you eligible when you buy a block of land that's 120? Can you get your GST?
Yeah, so we're exempt from stamp duty and GST.
Yeah. So we're talking blocks 150,000, 160,000 for 400. You're exempt from GST. Well, we've got to charge that. Council contributions $35,000 a lot. Orange City Council needs $35,000 a lot. They've got 1,500 lots to come out of Shirley, and they've got committed expenditure for sewer pump stations, water mains, parks, cycleways, buying open space and retention basins off people. So would the government ever come in and compensate council for that contribution and take that off, and we can get blocked down to 110? If you were exempt from GST, I don't think the ATO would let you out of, if you bought a block at 110 and you build a house on it, the ATO wouldn't let you out of the it's costing us 15,000. Are they things that people have ever thrown up?
Well, just as a not-for-profit organisation, we don't have to pay GST, so for the build costs or the stamp duty on the land. So that helps us to make it stack up.
Somehow if we can get the council compensated for contributions, or we get contributions,
it would certainly help, yeah.
Suddenly getting down to 30,000 and 40,000.
Yeah.
Okay, if there's any further quick contributions there, one from Eliza, and then we're going to take some questions from the floor.
Just as a side note, because it kind of got my goat, those people who are the people who I love working with,
I said that intentionally.
are the ones who need a house, because if you don't give the opportunity to those people who've left the incarceration system, if they've come out of rehab, they are the people that need to beg, borrow and steal, because they need food because they don't have a house to keep their food in at night. So we need to give these people an opportunity and a chance because they haven't been given the chance before. And when you give these people a chance, they have the opportunity then to contribute to society. And the further we put them away, the further we isolate them, the more problems we'll have. And we will see the crime rates in Orange, etc., continue because we haven't given them the roof over the head that they deserve and the capacity to contribute to our society.
Thanks, Eliza. Mick?
It's quite a simple equation. Cost of land, cost of building is the cost of development. You need to reduce the cost of one of those to make it work. Now, what Russell said makes sense, but what they've got to remember is they've got to replace those houses with a like sort of little house, a little 2 or 3 bedroom house that's got a simple kitchen with no garage. That's not all the bells and whistles that they want these days. That's the hard part. That I'm sure you deal with a lot of different sort of guys, but a lot of the first home buyers that I deal with, they want pantries and ensuite and double garages and all this sort of stuff. So you got to keep this house simple. Just a nice rectangular little house on these houses, on these blocks of land over in Glenroy or whatever. It can be quite simple if people keep it simple.
Thanks, Mick. Questions? We've got a bit over 10 minutes. Let's see how we go. You can try standing where you are, or you can move up to the mic, whatever. Let's hear from you.
Yes.
Bigger voice as we can. Questions rather than statements if we can. Yep.
You're already way over 55. I've actually got a mortgage at the moment, but I haven't got enough working years left anymore to pay that off. I'm currently trying to find a cheap block of land to put a $20,000 log cabin on, or a tiny home. I'd like to see council move with that tiny home movement, because a lot of us, I don't care about 5 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, just a small shack is enough, so that we can stop working 40, 50, 60 hours a week to try and pay that mortgage off before we drop dead. So we can have a couple of years of retirement. And council has got a lot of land, it's doing a lot with it at the moment. It could volunteer that land up for something like this, and then Housing Plus can come in and put this small community up.
Thank you. If you haven't heard the term tiny homes, go home and do a Google search.
Yep.
Council's donating former parking lots and tiny homes being built, moving beyond this thing where we all need this much space. Actually, what if we didn't? Yep, thank you.
So it's really a follow-up question from that, and it's a point of clarification from the panel perhaps. We've talked a lot about kind of building homes, 2 bedrooms, 5 bedrooms, whatever. It seems to me it's still within the mix of what is possible right now. I'm wondering about models that are very different, so whether they're tiny homes or whether they're collective ways of living. Do the planning laws allow for that type of thing? Why are we not talking about that yet? Maybe we'll get to that in the next conversation, but I'm just interested. I don't know the planning law well enough to understand that, and I'm wondering if anyone could shed some light, please.
Dave?
I think the planning system can accommodate it, but it needs flexibility from the regulators, but it also, more critically, probably needs understanding from the community, because we're already seeing that types of developments that the community is not comfortable with, and it's not about not being comfortable with them in general, it's about not being comfortable with them next to me. That is what is fundamentally the problem. So I think I think a good proportion of people sit there and watch Tiny Homes Hunter UK or whatever it is on Nine Life every night and think, oh, that's a great idea, until it's next to you. And that is the fundamental problem. And it takes bravery from the elected officials, and it takes bravery and flexibility from the council's regulators to say, we hear you, but there are bigger issues at stake here and we need to be more responsive to that. So that's my both professional and personal opinion, I guess, and probably I shouldn't mix the two, but I can't help it.
Thanks, Dave.
Yeah.
Thanks, Dave. Question here?
I think there's one group we haven't talked about here, and it's the ratepayers of Orange. And I think you're talking subsidies and dropping this and dropping that. Well, Orange City Council has to get their funding from somewhere, and who's going to be the bunny? I accept and agree with everything that's being said, but I think we've got to think about the ratepayers of Orange.
Thank you. Other question?
I think possibly, sorry, can I jump in and just broaden that all of our tenants, we pay rates, Land and Housing Corporation, who are the owner of that Aboriginal housing organisation, we pay rates. So we're one of Orange City Council's largest ratepayers. We pay water rates at the same rates that every other ratepayer does. So when we've got 900 tenancies, we're a large component of that contribution to the rates of Orange City Council.
Thank you. Up the back, yep.
Purpose-built camps to take some of the demand away from the existing housing stock? Has that been explored? Is that something that we have any policy levers to actually... I'll just project my voice.
Thank you.
Do we have any policy levers within state or local government to actually ask Newcrest to provide separate housing for their staff that are coming in for short periods of time, rather than putting that risk at our housing prices that might risk housing affordability, or likewise with our tourism sector, which is a big part of our economy?
Does anyone from Katie want to add to that? Or that, if I'm putting you on the spot, it can be a question, then we'll get back to you later if you'd like to say something. We need to get ahead of the red wall for the radio mics to work. Hope you're not putting you on the spot. Feel free to say no comment, Katie. Thank you.
I guess when...
Yes, it is. Just talk.
Part of our strategy for accommodation for our expansion was to reach out and engage with Orange 360 to try and manage the influx of our population that's coming in over the next couple of years. We've learned a lot of lessons, I guess, from Cadia East, and we're trying to put them into play for this expansion project. The numbers of people coming in aren't going to peak at as high level as they did in Cadia East days. It was about 3,000 people back in Cadia East days. The peak that we're going to see on top of our existing workforce is about 900 people, which will happen in not next year, but actually the year after. So we are planning for that. The options as far as camps are concerned, that's not really on the table at the moment. We have had some opposition to having camps. There are social issues associated with having camps as well. And I guess our big priority is to provide, put money back into our local economy rather than having that sort of camp scenario.
Thank you so much. Councillor Tony Melito wanted a question. That'll probably work for you, Tony. Or you could just go and stand over there. Thank you. No, across to the lectern. Any other questions are coming? We're at the last 5 minutes. You want to put their hand up? One at the back. Yep, thanks. And that might just about do us.
I guess I look at it a bit differently to some people, and I think what I'm hearing is the barriers why we can't do certain things, and a lot of that revolves around cost, etc. I think from my point of view, and it might upset a few people, but what I would like to do is see Orange City Council run a pilot program where they become the developer of a block of land that we own. And what I mean by that is there seems to be a lot of barriers to why we can't do certain things. But I think if we had the right sort of program, council become the developer, and we speak to the state government and say, look, this is a pilot program which we're looking at. Can we develop this block of land? By doing that, we can all have an input into what we want to do. It can be exactly what we want. That could be a program that can be used throughout the state should it be successful. Council does own a lot of land, but I'm assuming there'll be some objection to developers, but it's with some of the land that we have, we're doing an audit at the moment. What are we going to do with that land? Well, is there an opportunity to look at where we can develop affordable housing, social housing, take the pressure off some of these other organisations that are trying to do all this work? It could be something which we could be a leader in the further New South Wales or Australia. In fact, we look at some of the things which Orange Council are really doing well. We look at our water harvesting. We're renowned all over the world for being a leader in that. We can also be the leader in housing, whether it be social or affordable. And I think there's an opportunity there, providing we're brave enough to do that. I think it's something which we can start a discussion and perhaps look at moving forward.
Thanks, Tony. Last question.
I'll just reply to that. I think that's a great idea, Tony, but The other thing also is you've got blokes like Greg, Housing Plus, all these guys that are prepared to do these developments. They get so much resistance that, whether it's the neighbours, whether it's the conditions that get put on it, whether there's a tree there with a possum in it, whatever it is, there seems to be always something that's stopping these guys from doing it, and the time frames. I mean, these guys have probably got, I know, $1 million block of land sitting there paying 6% interest, I mean, it's costing them $60,000 to sit there for 12 months while the whole process gets, go through. So, you've got guys like this that are prepared to do some affordable housing or these type of developments. We need to make it easier for them.
Thanks, Mick. Last question. Home straight.
Thank you. And look, I think this has been a really good discussion, and a lot of the things that have come up, I've seen operate elsewhere. I'm originally from England and later from Fairfield, where I've seen some of those things work. So Communities Plus and council being a developer work very well in Fairfield. There's Bonnyrigg, which is the most interesting case. It's a very, very big former housing commission, and it's salt and pepper now. The regeneration concepts that Councillor Turner was talking about as well, I think, it's important to do that rather than treat an area as a no-go zone. But I was interested in what was said about supply and demand. There's also costs and income. So income's also part of the issue, and there's been a downward pressure on wages and welfare forever. So that's perhaps not something we can do something about, but it's something we need to talk about. The other thing was electricity, that I think you said 120,000 for
No, $7,500 a block, which includes...
Yeah.
120,000 substation does about 40 blocks.
Yeah. So before electricity was privatised, that would have been done by the public provider of electricity, because...
Is there a question coming? We're running short of time.
I'm going, so well, let's go out and lobby to have that change, because it's clearly not working having to pay that kind of money. So that's a question. Can we do that?
Thanks very much. We've got to the end of our time. This is the start of a conversation. As you know, we're developing this local housing strategy that's going to take a while. I look forward to the community being just as interested in the coming months as we move on to the further steps. Dave earlier on mentioned the spectrum of council sit back and do nothing, council just measure and watch, through to council being actively involved. We've heard all the options here. Thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate all your inputs. Thank you. Will you help me thank the panel for their expertise? Stay tuned for some more. Thanks for coming.